Hi everyone, welcome back to Techknow with Sudeep. In today's episode, we are going to dive deep into the most essential setup in Dynamics 365 Finance and Operation, that is vendor master creation. We already walked through in my previous sessions. I gave a overview about purchase and sourcing module and why we need it, what's the purpose of having this specific module, and also the why in the most of the implementation this is the module to kickstart it from, right? So if you haven't watched it, you can go back and get the deeper understanding of this specific module and jump back to this session. But in this session, we're going to create, of course we're going to create in a vendor, and from an understanding the concept of party and how it's associated with the vendor record, and exploring the multiple ways to create a vendor master, and way of sharing this specific vendor to the multiple legal entities. And we're also looking into the vendor group, vendor profile. In short, we're going to break down all the specific fields importance, and when you're creating the vendor, what all aspects which you need to make sure that have to consider, right? At least to start, the basic level of working has to be done within the any ERP. We're going to talk about all those things with respect to the vendor master. So with that note, let's get started. Create a vendor. So let's go to the module. You could do it in a couple of ways. Accounts payable, which is understandable that accounts payable is related to the vendor. And also we have a one more module called procurement and sourcing. The procurement and sourcing. So this is the two module where you could click technically create uh, uh, vendors there. So if you go to the procurement and sourcing module, you could click on vendors and go to the all vendors. The usual place you will go is always the accounts payable, where you could click on and you'll get the vendors. The all vendor is the place where you could see the all the vendors which has been created, the list of this specific company. Just give a couple of seconds so you could see that what all the companies vendor is been created. You will be seeing it in this. Now before we click on new, the first thing which you need to understand that when you're creating a vendor is you should get a right number series. That's the anyhow the first setup which you need to make sure that you need to set in place before you creating the vendor. To check the number series, to map the number series, you have to go to the accounts payable. Always believe that all this module has a one significant setup page is called accounts payable parameter, same like account receivable parameter. So most of the stuff you will find in this specific uh, setup page, right? Let's go to the accounts payable parameter and just see that number sequence, whether it has been mapped or not mapped. Let's go back to the number sequence and check that now vendor account has been mapped with the some sequence code. Of course you could go back and you could check it, and if you want to do a certain modification like increase the some adding some other stuff, we all discussed this stuff in the our initial video. You could go back and cross check it. Yeah, you could do a modification, so all fine. So that's the first step, and all other settings we're gonna come back when that specific fields comes in. We're going to discuss the other setup, but the first thing is that you need to make sure that number sequence is being mapped in the accounts payable parameters. Once that is been mapped, you can go back to the all vendors and click on hitting a new. When you hit a new, this vendor should be automatically created. See that vendor is created. Now this is my vendor. Of the important fields, like you could identify this person is a person or the organization, and another important field is the search name, where you could put the details like how you would like to search this specific vendor group. We'll come back on this. Number of employees you could put it, and ABC code, another way of grouping your vendor, is the setting a priority. The A being the highest priority, B being the lowest priority, C being the very lowest priority. You could group. This is more of like a informational purpose, which could be used for your reporting thing, right? That is something you could always use it. DSUS number, a unique 9-digit identification number, right? Every company usually gets that. If you have that information, you can use it. Again, not very important, will just informational purpose. Other informations, it's all self-explanatory, thing. So the vendor collaboration, we're going to cover it in our future session, right? Vendor collaboration, in the sense, when you're against this vendor, when you create any specific orders or the quotation or something, if you have created this vendor collaboration with this specific vendor, he could see it from his mobile apps, that what quote has been created, and he could upload his invoices and all of the stuff. He could do it with the vendor collaborations things. We're going to cover this in our future session. Yeah. Address, we already talked about this, how the address has to be created. It's just a matter of creating an ad and putting all those respective fields. So vendor group is another very important field. You possibly, this will be used for couple of purpose, right? I will dig deep into that information very shortly, but it's a matter of grouping your vendor in a certain way. To give an example, like how possibly you could group your vendor, like example for example, there will be a vendors like a raw material supplier. You could group that all the raw material supplier as a one specific group. There could be another vendor called packaging vendors, right? So he provides the all the packaging related stuff, to you. So you could group it as a packaging vendor. Or it could be a machinery related vendor. He provides the big equipments for you, for your company. So you could make it as a that supplier as a vendor. Or could be a service provider, that could be a temporary or a one-time vendor. So you could group it in a certain way, which could be used for to one is the, of course, for the reporting purpose, and system also could be used for the pricing. You group certain vendor as based on the pricing things. You could also trigger a pricing based on a certain group, and also you could trigger a discount based on a certain group, and this group can be used in a multiple ways. We're going to discuss most in deeply, but to give a high level understanding, is a way of grouping a vendor. One, of course, for the reporting purpose, and it also could be used in a several other ways also. So let me create a couple of you know a group here. So there is no group as such. So to create a group, you could right click and put the vendor group. Yeah. And I'm going to create another thing like packaging supplier. I forgot to put the descriptions, right? So let me put the description, just an identification purpose, right? It's the packaging vendor. I have these details already maintained. Capital service vendor. So I've created a 5 vendor. Now there is also a couple of other things like terms of payment can be attached to it. Usually, personally, this is my personal opinion, that you shouldn't be matching the terms of payment unless you have a clear cut definitions which been outlined with the from your customer, that all the temporary supplier will have a certain terms of payment. In that case, you could always map against this vendor group. Otherwise, it will always be a, from my implementation experience perspective, I would say that is always a vendor specific terms of payment. The terms of payment is when you would like the payment needs to be done, a credit period, right? So I'll create a couple of terms of payment here. So create a terms of payment like 30-day, due. Yeah. So you're going to say that net 30 days. We're going to discuss all other important fields some in a bit. Yeah. So you could attach that one. Yeah. Otherwise, it will always be a other thing, right? It will always be a you're going to map the terms of payment to specific to the vendor card. Other things will come back shortly. Save it, come back, and I'm going to say that this is my raw material supplier, right? The contact information. Now this is again another important information. Now this vendor, we said that is an organization, right? Inside this organization, if you have to maintain all the contacts detail, possible contacts details which you possibly interact to follow up, or could be for the quotation, for to check this possible available inventory. So all those information contacts detail you could add. To do the adding a contact, say that he's a purchase department guy, purchase department, his phone number, or you could say that his name. I would say that John, and you put this contact information, and you could make his primary, primary detail contact information is this. It's like that you could add multiple information. And the next important thing is the under the miscellaneous details, right? So the credit rating and the credit limit can be one of the important field. To say that credit limit in the sense when we are paying this to the vendor, what could be a possible a credit limit which this specific vendor provides you. So if that is something vendor provides you the credit limit, you could always enter that credit limit over here. To enable the credit limit, you have to go back to the again in the accounts payable parameters, right? So accounts payable parameters, and in the credit rating, you have to enable the what's the possible credit rating. Now there are a couple of ways. Credit limit type is none, in the sense there is no credit limit can be allowed or system to trigger, or the credit limits to be trigger based on balance. And example, now each vendor will have a certain balance to show up that how much have I have owe him, that how much I need to pay him. If based on that parameters, credit limit has to be triggered. For example, a credit limit has been set as 10,000 and your balance is 11,000. System will trigger a message saying that this is overdue from your credit limit, right? You have to pay at least 1,000 so that it is comes within your credit limit range. That's how system checks if you put the credit limit type as a balance. If you put it as a balance but packing slip as a product receipt, in the sense you already have a certain balance recorded against the vendor, and also you have open product receipt, right, which is not been invoiced yet. You just received the material, vendor has not sent an invoice to you. If both has to be added included when your credit limit to be calculated, you could set this balance plus packaging ziploc product receipt, balance plus all, it will all take into consideration of credit memos, invoices, and all of this stuff, right? So everything will be considered. That's but in this our example, you're going to use the balance. That's the setup. Again, as I said, most of the setup is included in the accounts payable parameter itself. Use that setup, and you saved it, and you go back to the all vendors, and you open this vendor account again. So we added the miscellaneous period. So all other things is mostly about the informational purpose, buyer group, the reason code, all these things can be maintained. The current hold status, vendor hold, this is again one of very important thing. The holding status is talks about what's the current status of vendor, assuming that you purchase most of the stuff from this specific vendor, and if vendor provides you the bad quality product frequently, and if you want to hold him that the other people, other purchasing team, or the your purchasing team don't have to use in future with this, procure anything from this vendor, you could always put the this vendor on hold. Now how you could do that, hold this vendor, you could go back to the vendor, and in this on maintain status you could change it, and you could say that why you are holding, and when you're holding it, what you're holding it invoice, and you're holding making a further payment, or any requisition is not allowed, or the purchase order cannot be created, or everything is on hold. So if that is something, you could click on hold, and you could put the date, like vendor hold till what date, and you could put the reason code. You could add your own reason code, and put the reason like why this vendor is being holded, right? And you could also put that if this vendor has been shared with the multiple vendor, you could automatically hold it from all the legal entities by simply clicking OK here. Rebate group, we're going to come back on this rebate group with this real sample scenarios, but just to give you an idea about this specific field, the rebate in the sense, usually if you're having in a long-term agreement with any vendor, and you promise the vendor that I'm going to always procure of value of 100,000, or you could say that procure a quantity of 50,000 quantities. If that is some kind of an agreement, you hold it with the vendor offers you a certain rebate, that if you hold, or if you buy from me like 100,000 of worth of goods from me, or certain amount of quantities from me, then I offer you a 5% rebate. Then you could claim this 5% discount from the vendor. That's what about the vendor rebate group. So we don't add up anything as such now. When this scenario comes up, we're gonna put that setup and the details and other stuff, right? Vendor profile is a matter of, again, is informational purpose. This is all predefined vendor profile fields, which you could use it. Purchasing demographics is currencies, at what currency this specific vendor deals with it. Right now it's an INR. It's because my this currency legal entities has set up as INR. If not, if then some other specific currency this customer is deals with, you could put that one. The primary contact details, all those things is more of like an informational purpose. Employee responsible, if this is again one of important field which can be used, that any specific in your employee, he who manages this specific vendor, he could be added details here, right? uh, then the invoice and delivery is invoice account is again could be a very important field. We will discuss this in more in other stuff, but to give an importance of this field, that in assuming that you're purchasing the invoice, purchasing the inventory from this specific vendor, but invoice always will be raised to some other company. For example, that this is a sister company, and it has this vendor has a main company, right? But he is sending all the material, but invoicing will, or the payment will always be done against the his main company. Then if that's the case, you have to create that vendor as a that company as a vendor in your legal entity, and then map that vendor account from the drop down. If you drop down it, right, it will take back to the vendor account itself. Now the fresh harvest I created, you could always that HO of fresh harvest, another vendor, and you could map it that for going forward, receiving is here, but invoice will be done always against this one. Number sequence group, if you want to maintain a different uh, invoice series, when the invoice gets created, you want to have a specific invoice number, you could always create the number sequence for that. The other thing which we also talked about is sharing this specific vendor to the multi-legal entities. Now, one of the uniqueness of D365 F&O, I'm going to repeat it again and again, that system supports the multi-legal entities, and it supports multi-legal currencies. So you expect that whatever you created in a one system or the one company, you expect that to be get flow if needed to other companies also. That's why it supports the our possibility of sharing whatever you created in a other thing. Now assume that if you want to create a vendor, and if you don't want to share that specific vendor to the other legal entities, then you're gonna go back to the accounts payable and create that vendor directly. If you expect that to be get shared with the other companies also, then you have to create a something called party ID, right? So to create that party ID, is you have to go to the organization administration, global address book, and go to the global address book. And this is where you go and create the party IDs. Just create a party ID. System generates the ID to you, and tell the party which is you are creating is a person or organization. If it is a person and organization, just hit organization and say that what is the organization name. You're gonna the vendor like organization name. I'm saying that XYZ Company Limited, and that's it. Most of the stuff is like name, search name is fine. Other all fields are very much self-explanatory. Address, you could add the address, like I could add, go back and add the address to this one, and they say that it's a company limited, it's a business. What's the postal code? Just hit click OK. This address comes in, and the only thing you have to do is click on save. Once you click on say, you can click on the party and you could say that whether you're creating a customer or the vendor. Based on what you hit, that corresponding entry get created in the system and get linked with this specific party. Then I'm going to say that vendor. I'll say that I want to create a vendor. Once you do that, all other information get flow. You could see that address get automatically detailed, and the only thing I have to make a mandatory field is a uh, number the group, vendor group, right? So I'm selecting this vendor group and I gonna select save. By doing that, if you could go back and you click on save here also, you could see that that is gets added to this specific company. You could do the same thing in other companies also. You could go there and make sure that you create it, and automatically that gets associated with this specific company, this party ID. The other possibility that if you want to go back and change the your vendor's associated ID, you could always do that. If I have that three specific things get added, if I go back here, and if you want to change the party association, you could always go there, change the party association. And if you want to that, okay, I found new party, guys. I would select and I click OK. The party association, yes, and your no party association has been changed. There's always the possibility of doing it. Now, the one last thing about the vendor thing is vendor posting profile. You could go to the accounts payable and hit the vendor posting profile. Now, this vendor posting profile is the way of telling. It's more for the financial purpose, right? When you create a purchase order or the purchase invoice, you select the vendor and you select the items and you post it. When you post it, there are certain journal entries needs to be get hit through chart to your GL account, or you call it as a chart of account. That mapping will be done in the vendor posting profile. This is the only the one part, as we discussed this stuff in our previous session, when I said that each transaction will always be some credit, then there will be a debit. If there's some debit transaction happens, then there should be a corresponding credit transaction happens. Now imagine in the purchase, when you're creating a purchase order, you have a header where the vendor information is there, where it usually get credit. So when you select the vendor account, vendor number, you need to map it that where it needs to be credited. That information will be residing in the vendor posting profile. Where it needs to be debited, this is something we're gonna check, or we'll see in our next session. To create the vendor posting profile is just a matter of clicking a new, and you're gonna give the ones, what are the posting profile I could give in the form of we are creating a different groups, vendor groups. So I'm going to create a posting profile for raw material. I'm saying that my all raw material vendor should get hit this specific chart of account. That's simply thing what I'm saying. Could click on add, and you could add account code is a table. Always remember, in the F&O, table means you're selecting a specific vendor, customer, item, or anything. If you have to select individual thing, you're going to always select table. The group, this is all about talks about the vendor group, right? When you select the vendor group, You're going to say that what vendor group you want to select. I'm selecting raw material supplies, and select the chart of account which you would like to, it needs to be get credited, right? So I have a accounts payable account, so I'm selecting the accounts payable account. All other account, don't have to worry about it. We're going to come back on this later, yeah, and just hit the save. That's it. So you don't have to again come back in the vendor and select that vendor profile, because as you said, this vendor profile can be mapped against to the vendor. If you're selecting the table, then you have to select the individual vendor account whom you are making that profile. If it is a vendor group, we already map the vendor group to the this specific vendor, so system knows that which specific AP account it needs to be hit. If you're selecting all, that means all vendor will gonna hit the that specific uh, AP account, so you don't have to select that profile anything in the individual vendor account, unlike in other ERPs like Business Central and other stuff, right? And that was wrap our session, and that's it from today's session of vendor master creation. We covered how vendors are created, associated with the parties, and the key setup like groups and vendor posting profile, and all this how drives the procurement operation. In the next video, we're gonna check item master setup and how the items and the product will be get created in the system. With that note, thank you for watching the video. We'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.